My name is Gabriel Wortman. I'm a licensed insurance here in the province of Nova Scotia.
51-year-old Gabriel Wortman is also the man police say went on a 12-hour shooting spree, killing at least 16 people.
The killer is wearing parts of a real Mountie uniform, complete with a patch visible on his right sleeve.
On April 18th, 2020, a man dressed as an RCMP officer began a killing spree that lives in infamy. Disguised as an officer and driving a replica RCMP cruiser, Gabriel Wortman's rampage is a chilling look into the damage one person can cause. By the end of the day, this ended up being the deadliest mass casualty event in Canadian history, leaving 22 dead and 3 injured. But who was Gabriel Wortman and what happened on that fateful day? Wortman was born on July 5th, 1968, to Paul and Evelyn Wortman, and he grew up in Riverview, New Brunswick. Wortman's father made his childhood home a terror, abusing his son and his wife. Despite her shared abuse, Gabriel would blame his mother for not protecting him more from his father, leading to his eventual threats of murder against his parents in 2010. One incident that stood out to a family member was when Gabriel's father put a .22 caliber rifle in his hand and screamed, "Shoot me," at his 7-year-old son. Gabriel was also forced to shoot the family dog by his father. The cycle of abuse was a trend that extended over generations, going back at least 2 generations on his father's side of the family. Gabriel attended the University of New Brunswick, where he started his criminal activities. He and a friend would use a sailboat to cross the US border and smuggle cheap US tobacco and alcohol back to Canada. He would then sell them on campus, where he became known as the smuggled cigarettes and alcohol dealer. Eventually, after graduating, he became a denturist and ran 2 offices, one being in Halifax and the other in Dartmouth. Although at first glance he seemed to be doing well, there were some disturbing things going on behind the scenes. Gabriel had been in a 19-year abusive relationship with Lisa Banfield. Despite being described as a man with no respect for women, he was an alleged sexual predator, reportedly taking advantage of vulnerable women through his denturist practice and at house parties he would host. A few of his neighbors had reported domestic violence at his property, which was never followed up on by the RCMP. He also had 2 separate assaults on his father, once in Cuba on a family trip, and a second time in the Dominican Republic. Both times he beat his father unconscious. Even with these 2 documented assaults, he was only charged once, for the assault of a 15-year-old boy who was too close to his store. However, things got even more concerning. Gabriel's home had been described as a shrine for the RCMP. His obsession with the RCMP was a major factor in the tragedy, and he used the RCMP equipment as a way to get his victims' guard down. The vehicle used throughout the shootings was a repaired RCMP vehicle that even had matching decals. Many people close to him described his behavior as being extremely paranoid in the year leading up to the shooting and obsessed with an impending apocalypse. He began having increased worries that the government was going to be taking people's money, guns, and more. The stress of the pandemic only added to this, believing it would be the cause of the collapse of the global economy. Gabriel's fear was when the government stops handing out money, people will become desperate and will start to steal, rob, and pilfer from people. This paranoia seems to explain why he started to stockpile weapons leading up to that fateful day in 2020. Just before 10 p.m. on April 18th, 2020, Gabriel Wortman abducted, bound, and threatened his common-law partner, Lisa Banfield. Banfield was left in Wortman's cottage, but fortunately managed to escape. Shortly after her getaway, he set fire to the home and warehouse. The next hour plunged the quiet community of Portapique into hell. After he had left his home ablaze, Wortman set out to his first victims. After leaving his own residence, Wortman made his way to one of his neighbors, Greg and Jamie Blair, who lived just next door to him. After approaching them at their home, he began his killing spree. Greg Blair was murdered on his deck, while the rest of the family was inside. After hiding her children in their bedroom, Jamie made a phone call to the RCMP, reporting that her husband had been shot by one of their neighbors who was imitating an officer, and informed them of the replica RCMP cruiser he was driving. Wortman entered the bedroom and shot Jamie, who died from her injuries, and returned to the living room where he set the home on fire. Fortunately, the Blair children remained undetected by Wortman and managed to remain hidden until the smoke from the fire forced them to flee the property to the home of their neighbors. This is where the RCMP investigation was unclear on Wortman's next moves. One theory is that he headed south towards Cobequid Court. While in this court, Wortman shot and killed Peter and Joy Bond inside their home, as well as shooting Aaron Tuck, Emily Tuck, and Jolene Oliver. For unknown reasons, none of these homes were set on fire. There is some evidence to support the theory that they approached these homes after the Blair murders. This includes text records from Emily Tuck's cell phone, which had a last outgoing message at 10:03. Lisa McCulley lived next door to the Blairs and had noticed the home was on fire. After heading out into her backyard to look over the fence, she was fatally shot. Meanwhile, the Blair children had escaped their home and made their way over to the front door, where the McCulley children let them in to remain out of sight. One of the children placed a phone call to 911 around 10:16 p.m. Based on what the RCMP found in the neighborhood, it appears that the next victims of this massacre were Frank and Dawn Galinchin. Some of the neighbors had reported gunfire around 10:20 p.m., shortly before the home was set on fire. Andrew and Kate McDonald were two of these witnesses. They had been in their car driving to check on Wortman's warehouse, which was engulfed in flames. As they called the RCMP to report this fire, they noticed that Galinchin's home was on fire. The RCMP vehicle that was spotted followed them, and as they passed it, Andrew noticed Wortman pointing a pistol at him, and sped off after being shot in the shoulder. They drove down the road until they encountered authentic RCMP members north of the crime scene. Wortman had turned around and was driving south. After a few minutes, he approached the home of Joanne Thomas and John Zoll, where he shot and killed both of them, and set the house on fire. After returning towards his own residence, Wortman encountered Corey Ellison, who was taking photos of the warehouse fire. He shot and killed Corey Ellison, and then left the neighborhood via the Blueberry Road. This road was semi-abandoned, and was not closed off by the RCMP or any other means. Patricia Zimmerman, one of the neighbors who survived the massacre, reported a car traveling on Blueberry Road towards Highway 2 at around 10:45 p.m., approximately the time that Wortman was escaping the neighborhood. After fleeing the neighborhood, he made the drive to D. Burt, where he spent the night sleeping in the parking lot of an industrial park. Local restaurants and businesses had security footage showing up throughout the night, showing the replica RCMP car passing by many times. There was also eyewitness accounts of the cruiser and driver, as he just wasn't acting like a police officer. At a later date, there were bullet cases found, as well as a pair of RCMP boots that had the name Wortman drawn inside, giving more evidence that he had spent the night there. On those same surveillance tapes, we see Wortman leaving this area around 5:45 a.m., headed towards the highway. He would take this road until he arrived at the home of Alana Jenkins and Sean McLeod, two acquaintances. They would become his next victims. One of the closest neighbors reported having heard a gunshot and a yelp of one of the family dogs around 6:10 a.m. Sometime between 6:30 and 8, there were two more gunshots that would result in the deaths of Alana and Sean. It is unclear exactly what time these two met their fates. After taking Sean McLeod's wallet, Wortman set fire to their home, attracting Tom Bagley, who was a neighbor and a volunteer firefighter. Tom took his daily walk, starting around 8:50 a.m. During this walk, the smoke rising from the home attracted his attention, and shortly after arriving at the home, was shot dead by the perpetrator. Wortman then left their home and continued back onto Highway 4. At around 9:30 a.m., he passed Lillian Campbell, a resident of Wentworth, who was out on her morning walk. Shortly after passing her, he turned around in the replica RCMP car and shot Mrs. Campbell from the vehicle. It was later revealed that neither Lillian nor her husband were aware of the prior night's shootings or fires. Just after 10 a.m., the replica RCMP car was spotted by Corporal Rodney Peterson, who was en route to the Wentworth homicide scene. He quickly radioed in the sighting and turned around to pursue Wortman south. Unfortunately, he had already disappeared from sight and managed to elude Corporal Peterson. During this evasion, Wortman hid in the city of Glenholm. He approached the home of Adam and Carol Fisher, rifle in hand. Still in uniform, he knocked on the door and tried to enter the home. The Fishers recognized him and managed to stay out of sight while calling 911. After realizing he would not get in, Wortman returned to his car and left the scene. RCMP emergency response team members were on scene at the Fishers' residence by 10:02, where it was determined that the replica RCMP car and perpetrator were missing. Just barely evading capture, Wortman continued on Highway 4. Still in his police cruiser, he approached two women separately in their vehicles. Kristen Beaton was a mother pregnant with her second child, who was shot through the window of her car. Just past this, Wortman encountered Heather O'Brien, who was on the call with her friend Leona Allen. After hearing gunshots and screaming, Miss Allen called 911 to report what had happened to her friend. RCMP members diverted from the Fisher residence and continued to chase after Wortman, hoping to end this tragic event before more lives could be stolen. Some distance away from Wortman, however, he was still causing chaos. The Onslow Belmont Fire Brigade was running a community comfort point for those leaving Portapique in light of the shooting. They were set up in their fire hall where there would be a huge miscommunication. Around 10:17 AM, there were shots between RCMP constables who believed that they were encountering Gabriel Wortman. The miscommunication here was due to information gained from Lisa Banfield, Wortman's common-law wife. He had last been sighted in an RCMP uniform and orange security vest, which David Westlake was wearing. Constables Terry Brown and Dave Melanson were traveling past, sighted Westlake, and told him to put his hands up. After hearing this, the constable ducked behind his cruiser. Brown and Melanson each fired a round from their carbine rifles at the other cruiser, where an officer was frantically radioing, getting his fellow constables to check out his cruiser number to see that he was not the shooter. Around 10:50 AM, Gabriel Wortman entered his first firefight with RCMP officers. On Highway 2, Constable Chad Morrison saw an RCMP cruiser that he thought was being driven by Constable Heidi Stevenson, who was driving to meet up with him. He had parked on the side of Highway 2, where he was met with a flurry of bullets from the shooter. Fortunately, Morrison was not killed by the bullets, and fled the scene to receive medical assistance. While following Morrison, Wortman swerved across the lane to collide head-on with Constable Heidi Stevenson. After the collision, both opened fire on one another, resulting in injuries to both of them. Unfortunately, Stevenson received many gunshot wounds and had fallen to the ground. Wortman approached her and shot her dead. He then stole her firearm, but nothing else. A Good Samaritan, Joseph Weber, had pulled over to make sure that the officers of the head-on collision were okay. Wortman ordered him into the back of his replica RCMP cruiser and executed him in the back seat. After stealing his keys and retrieving his weapons, Wortman set the vehicle on fire. He then stole Weber's SUV and drove off. Fleeing the scene, he drove to the home of another member of the Dentures community in Nova Scotia. Gina Goulet was at home with their 2 dogs when he entered it. There was an outgoing call to her daughter around 10:58 AM, but the two never talked. Wortman had entered the home and fatally shot Gina Goulet. After this murder, he changed out of the RCMP costume, ditched Weber's SUV, and stole Miss Goulet's Mazda 3. This scene was discovered by her daughter and son-in-law, who arrived shortly before noon, where they discovered the grisly scene. Wortman had fled the premises in the Mazda 3 and made his way into town to refuel his stolen vehicle. He stopped in Elmsdale to refuel at the Petro-Canada gas station, but didn't fill up. He then stopped at the Irving Big Stop gas station in Enfield, where he remained in the vehicle. Around 11:25 AM, an unmarked RCMP vehicle, driven by Constable Craig Hubley and Ben McLeod, pulled up near the Mazda 3. They had positioned themselves with a gas pump and a pillar in between. After recognizing Wortman, they exited the vehicle and entered tactical positioning. After using tactical instructions, the broadcast on McLeod's walkie-talkie was interrupted by gunfire. The shooting had come to an end. Gabriel Wortman was pronounced dead at 11:27 AM. After investigating the body, it was determined that along with multiple gunshot wounds from the responding RCMP officers, there was also evidence of a self-inflicted gunshot to the head. After nearly 13 hours of murder, fire, and chaos, this murderous rampage came to a close. Nothing found in Gabriel Wortman's possessions have given much insight into what drove him to commit such atrocities. The impact that his traumatic childhood and unstable behaviors had are still being studied by professionals. His violent past clearly could have played a role in this, with his assault on his family, vulnerable women through work, and even youth in the community. In hindsight, many people began to discuss the warning signs that he was showing prior to this. In some terrible irony, his yearbook entry mentions the fact that his future may include being a member of the RCMP. Thanks to further investigation, some interesting facts later came to the surface. Up to a decade prior to the mass casualty event, Wortman had begun hiding money in suspicious ways. His distrust for the Canadian banking system was deep-seated, and he believed that the collapse of it was inevitable. One of his biggest fears was that the Canadian government would seize money from bank accounts. Other folks have cited that he started stockpiling and preparing for the end times as the COVID pandemic began escalating. He was stockpiling weapons and ammunition, and in the months prior, he began to withdraw all his money from his various banks. One of these withdrawals caused an enormous amount of suspicion. Wortman was seen withdrawing $475,000 from Brinks, a major banking organization, earlier in 2020. According to officials, he had worked with CIBC to liquidate some assets, which is why he had such high quantities of cash in his possession. This has led to some speculation and conspiracy. Some sources identified as Mounties, who preferred to stay nameless, said that it had the hallmarks of an undercover case. Some suggested Wortman could have been an undercover informant for the RCMP. They discussed the difficulty for a civilian to withdraw $470,000 at once from Brinks. Evidently, this is how undercover payments are made to undercover agents and informants. However, this has not been officially confirmed. According to the RCMP, they never worked with Wortman in any capacity, and he was never involved in any investigations. Things got even deeper when it seemed as if he never left his smuggling ways behind. A search warrant executed after the killing spree spoke of one shipment he brought across the border containing 10,000 Oxycontin pills and 15,000 Dilaudid pills. This was matched and supported by a large number of false panels and hiding spots in his home, offices, and warehouse. Aside from drugs, he smuggled a number of weapons used in the shooting across the border from Maine, after receiving them from a friend who lived there. After searching Wortman's burnt-out cottage, they discovered countless false panels and hiding spots. They also found $705,000 buried in the rubble, wrapped in tinfoil and stuffed into ammo crates. In the wake of the tragedy, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced the government would be banning 1,500 models and variants of assault-style firearms, in direct action towards gun control. The RCMP also took steps to stop anyone from being able to impersonate an officer as Wortman did. They now prohibit the sale of marked RCMP cars as well as RCMP decals. The new legislation also increases the responsibility of the RCMP with regard to uniforms and badges, with new asset management policies. October of 2020 marked the beginning of a class action lawsuit against the RCMP, representing over 100 people, including the kids of those who were murdered. This lawsuit stated that the RCMP failed at its duty to protect those murdered in numerous ways, such as failing to do its duty to stop the killer, as well as issuing an emergency alert, something that could have prevented a large number of deaths caused by Wortman. It also looks at past incidents that the RCMP did not investigate. Wortman's domestic violence reports, and reports of him having illegal firearms on his property. This lawsuit started having hearings in February of 2022 and continues to this day. As of today, the lawsuit is still in limbo. Nothing has been officially determined, and the estate of Gabriel Wortman remains unused. The most recent change to this has been the addition of Lisa Banfield, her brother and brother-in-law, as defendants to the class action lawsuit after charges of assisting Wortman by providing ammunition to him were brought against them. The dark cloud of Gabriel Wortman still hangs over Nova Scotia, and only time will tell what will come of the trial. As always, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and want to see more like this in the future. Also leave a comment down below letting us know what you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching and have a good one.